This young tennis enthusiast has witnessed what Alex Eala has accomplished in the Middle East and Australia this year. Every place she has gone, she has drawn large crowds that consistently support her. The crowd there on a Monday was incredible, as Jess put it best at her post-match award ceremony. With all the delays on Sunday, it is difficult to accomplish that. Cincinnati believed it was going to host another WTA 1000 event. Rather, Alex Eala is experiencing something wholly unanticipated. Even the tennis world is unable to ignore the atmosphere created by the flood of Filipino fans attending the game. This is the odd part, though. This goes beyond a single up-and-coming star winning games. It is becoming impossible to ignore the response from players, spectators, and the tournament itself as something far more significant is taking place. And Eala is where it all begins. How would you sum up the influence of Eala? Explain her influence on this competition. Yes, it was simply unheard of. That is unlike anything we have ever witnessed in Toronto. It came as a surprise. In Doha, we witnessed the growth in momentum starting in February and continuing throughout the previous year. Every game she played sold out during the week of the event, which truly brought things to a head. The WTA 1000 appeared more like a national holiday celebration from Manila than a typical tennis tournament after Alex Eala arrived, and the event's enormity left seasoned observers questioning whether the population statistics had been drastically understated. I believe that people are misinterpreting the intensity of Alex Eala's supporters as something against the opposing player, which I don't believe. And I didn't notice that at all in the DC crowd. As a spectator, it's just so much more fun to be in the stands. Furthermore, they are not treating the player disrespectfully, contrary to what you claimed. The only thing you could say, I suppose, would be to cheer. There has historically been a reasonably reliable formula for tennis attendance. Examine the demographics of the area, calculate the size of the pertinent fanbase, and anticipate that the audience will mirror those figures. However, in Cincinnati, Alex Eala upset that formula. Her support among Filipinos increased to what seemed to be comparable to areas like Toronto, where there are hundreds of thousands of Filipino residents. Even seasoned tennis viewers were left wondering if they had overestimated Eala's reach because of the unanticipated disparity between the local populace and the audience response. After spending the previous 4 days at the Cincinnati Open, I've returned home and wanted to provide another update on my trip. I was able to see Alex Eala, attend the press briefings, and have a conversation with her. I believe our press conference is available on the YouTube channel if you want to watch it. I posed a few queries to her. I slipped in a bit of Tagalog. We know she's an elephant, which is why I wanted to talk here. I'll leave the solutions somewhere else. In a way that felt almost personally offensive to anyone who had spent years trusting the numbers over the noise, those veterans watched the stands fill with flags, chants, and energy levels that simply refused to follow the norm. They were forced to face the unsettling possibility that their carefully constructed statistical frameworks had just been rendered obsolete by one rising player and her unexpectedly devoted following. The Alex Eala effect in our Filipino community, where thousands of flags were waved and new tournament fans were involved. Additionally, Leylah Fernandez defeated the world's 5th-ranked player to go to the round of 16. Other Canadians advance, and Vicky Mboko even visited the event site to interact with the spectators. All of our partners and players have been incredibly engaged. The activations were well attended and well engaged off-site as well. The phenomenon went far beyond any straightforward community rally because Eala has developed a crossover audience made up of people who attend because they are drawn to her personal tale of emotional honesty and resiliency, which somehow cuts through the typical polished packaging of professional sports and lands with the force of an unexpected plot twist in an otherwise predictable season. The long-held belief that support for athletes from smaller tennis nations is limited to diaspora pockets was suddenly challenged by fans who had never given tennis much thought. This shows that genuine connection can overcome geography and numbers with unexpected force, leaving the sport's long-standing gatekeepers to silently update their mental models while acting as though it was their idea all along. The effect was particularly noticeable in Cincinnati because, although the small local base should have produced quiet sessions, the courtside noise and visual spectacle suggested an entirely different reality in which the underdog narrative had somehow multiplied across state lines and cultural boundaries in a way that made the entire venue feel borrowed from a much larger and more passionate city. The intensity of the Filipino players at the U.S. Open will be comparable to that of the South Americans in Miami for Fonseca. They will become even more enamored with Eala. The Brazilians for Fonseca and the Filipinos for Eala, or really, anybody for Ayala right now, must be the two largest tennis fan bases at the moment. I think I know a few Filipinos, and I literally always say, "Hey, do you guys know Alex Eala?" Yes, we are aware of her. I take it that she plays tennis, as if she were the first. What sport she participates in comes next. Following a valiant triumph in Washington, D.C., there was a turning point that expedited this wider appeal. Ayala's moment of raw emotion after defeating a former Wimbledon champion quickly went viral on social media, inspiring viewers who had never watched a professional tennis match to learn the difference between a forehand and a backhand because the honesty on display felt more genuine than most scripted reality television. Instead of being another typical sports highlight that was meticulously edited for maximum inspirational impact, the display of vulnerability cut through the typical polished athlete persona and created an instant sense of intimacy that made distant observers feel as though they were witnessing a genuine human breakthrough. The scene's unvarnished honesty struck a chord because it contrasted sharply with the controlled media training that most athletes receive. It also encouraged fans to support someone who seemed willing to show the weight of the journey on her face without waiting for a press conference after the game to sanitize the emotion into something more marketable. From that point on, the story surrounding Ayala went beyond just her sporting accomplishments and started to encompass the emotional journey of a young athlete juggling the demands of the tour while bearing the hopes of an entire country on her shoulders in a way that somehow made each match feel like a new chapter in a narrative that fans had already chosen to follow through to the very end. The Ayala obsession will simply continue, and I have no idea how it will grow, but it just is. I'm not sure whether things can get any better. Even Christopher Nolan could not have directed her personal odyssey. The top 3 seeds, correct? She defeats 4-time major champion Osaka. She defeats Fernandez, the reigning champion and the final WTA 1000 winner, Vitolina. After that, the top seed in the championship game overcame a set deficit. Yes, and she had a lot of success winning the title after defeating Pegula 6-0 in the last match. Her background further strengthens this bond because she came from training environments that lacked the opulent facilities and limitless resources that many of her peers had access to. This contrast between inadequate infrastructure and increasing success has made her progress a shared project for fans who feel they are witnessing an underdog rewrite the expected script. Perseverance can overcome structural disadvantages, and this participatory feeling helps explain why crowds appear in places where demographic logic predicts they should not even exist in meaningful numbers. The atmosphere inside the venue felt more like a home crowd than a neutral stop on the North American hardcourt swing, and the volume of support increased to the point where more seasoned players looked around as if looking for the hidden microphone that was obviously broadcasting the match to an entire archipelago. The energy in Cincinnati reflected exactly that dynamic as spectators who had followed her from smaller events arrived ready to amplify every point and every moment of tension. She seems to be creating a new community. It goes without saying that her supporters now like watching tennis enough to have other favorites. She sells a lot of tickets, so I think it's fantastic and obviously excellent for the event. The demographic that Alex is bringing to tennis is fantastic, and I believe that we should all embrace it since it benefits us all. The persistent intensity and the presence of non-Filipino faces in the stands point to something more interesting and long-lasting than a simple gathering of expatriates searching for a familiar accent or a shared plate. Competitive fire and emotional openness have proven unusually magnetic in a landscape where many competitors treat every public appearance like a carefully managed brand activation, forcing industry observers who previously dismissed such turnout as transient diaspora enthusiasm to revise their assessments. In a sport that frequently rewards stoicism, her willingness to display the cost of the climb has paradoxically increased her appeal and attracted people who might not have cared about serve percentages and ground strokes, but now find themselves debating match strategy as if they had been watching the tour for decades. There are a few terms that come to mind, but remember that no culture can be summed up in a few words, in my opinion. Like other cultures, Filipino culture is multi-layered. You know, it's constantly changing. Therefore, community, family, hospitality, love, and kindness are what spring to me when I think of Filipino culture. Because they show how a player from a tennis nation still developing its infrastructure can have an impact far beyond the size of any one local community and can do so consistently enough to turn isolated surprises into an emerging pattern that demands explanation. The Cincinnati scenes represent more than just a brief increase in attendance. A feedback loop was created by the flags in the volume and the prolonged attention given to her matches. Her performance seemed to feed the visible support, which in turn deepened the audience's investment until the entire experience felt self-reinforcing and nearly independent of the official tournament branding. Veterans who had anticipated peaceful midweek sessions instead had to deal with crowded stands and increased media attention. The surprise was perceived as both professional curiosity and a tacit admission that the outdated predictive tools needed to be updated before the next event on the schedule made them even more obsolete. Regardless of the official population statistics, what once appeared to be an anomaly in Toronto now appears to be a pattern that follows Eala from city to city. The repetition of that pattern has started to feel less like coincidence and more like proof of a fundamental shift in how audiences choose where to spend their limited free time and emotional energy. I don't want to use the word historic, but seeing Layla and Alex here is significant for someone who was born in the Philippines and reared in Canada. I feel as though I'm becoming a touch sentimental. Yes, I can see that because it's something we've always hoped would happen, but tennis is such a competitive sport that you wouldn't think the Philippines was this powerhouse. This pattern also highlights a broader shift in how modern sports audiences form because digital access allows emotional moments to travel instantly and turn casual viewers into devoted followers without requiring physical proximity to large diaspora centers or expensive travel budgets that once limited such expansions. One such turning point was the Washington Tears, and following games have continued to support the idea that something real is happening instead than a contrived plot created by a marketing agency using a list of motivational beats. Fans react to the modesty of her beginnings and the obvious effort needed to compete at this level, and they translate that reaction into physical presence whenever the tour puts her within reach, even if that reach necessitates rearranging work schedules and traveling across state lines with the kind of dedication typically saved for significant finals or long-standing personal rivalries. For those who follow the business side of the sport and now have to explain to colleagues why the standard attendance algorithms failed so spectacularly in a market that should have been predictable, Cincinnati simply made the difference between expected and actual turnout particularly noticeable and, consequently, particularly memorable. I mean, I think it's fantastic. I just ended my match, and as I was being driven back by the small go-kart, I noticed that the practice court was packed. "Who's practicing right now?" I asked. "She hasn't even set foot on the court yet." I thought, when I saw the Filipino flags. However, I believe it's fantastic. They treat the supporters with such kindness. Some of them were on my court supporting me, and because I believe she's playing late tonight, I felt incredibly appreciative. The collective investment transforms each rally into a shared experience that transcends the scoreboard and turns courteous applause into something closer to communal release whenever a challenging point goes Eala's way, creating an atmosphere that leaves little room for the typical detachment of a neutral tournament. Curiosity-driven spectators frequently lingered because of the contagious emotional atmosphere within the arena, which further blurred the boundary between core community support and broader public attention until it started to feel more academic than useful. Eala's ability to create that atmosphere is a result of her audience's constant alignment, which is more potent than the meticulously planned performances that occasionally rule the larger sports entertainment scene. Across the North American swing, there is a growing awareness that some people rewrite attendance expectations through the power of personal narrative rather than through the size of any pre-existing fan group. Additionally, this awareness has an impact on how broadcasters distribute coverage in formerly secondary regions and how tournaments arrange their marketing. It's astounding to me that young Filipino boys and girls can now understand that it's possible to be a world-class tennis player and that they can share that love in Toronto while flying the flags of Canada and the Philippines. I wanted to mention that Michelle and I are visitors to this city. Every year, we travel here for the National Bank Open, but we are visitors to this city because we adore Canada and this competition. However, one thing I've seen with Alex in particular is that she makes everyone aspire to be somewhat Filipino. Because the local numbers rendered the accomplishment statistically unlikely, the Cincinnati chapter stands out. However, the reality on the ground defied probability in a way that made even the most data-driven experts acknowledge that human connection still has the power to make pure arithmetic look foolish. Even though the change comes with a layer of professional embarrassment at having missed the signals earlier, observers who previously relied on demographic maps are now studying emotional resonance and storytelling power as additional variables. This change alone represents a slight evolution in how the sport understands its own audience. The evidence from Cincinnati and previous stops suggests that the old assumptions about limited reach no longer hold with the same confidence as they once did, and that confidence has been replaced by a more cautious curiosity about what else the conventional wisdom might have gotten wrong. The crowds continue to appear, the energy keeps rising, and the prize keeps repeating itself, and each repetition erodes the idea that tennis support must remain geographically constrained by the size of local communities or the historical strength of national tennis programs. The fans who filled those stands did more than just cheer. Even though you're still very young and inexperienced, the spotlight that has been placed on you is extremely burdensome. Right now, is it just enjoyable or is it heavy for you? It might be both, in my opinion. You know, there are times when it's enjoyable and others when it's heavy, but at the end of the day, I'm also conscious that it's a crazy experience, so I'm just trying to process everything. In the end, the takeover of those Cincinnati courts was more about the quiet power of a story that people felt was worth attending in person than it was about any coordinated migration. The ensuing spectacle left the usual experts recalculating everything they believed to be true about how fandom actually works, while the fans themselves just kept showing up as if the recalculations were someone else's problem. After the last point is resolved and the last flag is folded, what's left is a quiet re-evaluation of expectations throughout the professional circuit, where the potential for unexpectedly strong support can no longer be written off as a local mishap or fleeting novelty. While broadcasters adjust their cameras to capture faces that come without any marketing campaign targeting them, tournament administrators now have the peculiar problem of planning for audiences that emerge according to emotional gravity rather than census tables. This shift implies that the audience environment that the next generation of tennis players may inherit may be more influenced by the unpredictable reach of real human tales that refuse to remain contained inside familiar boundaries or predictable patterns of allegiance than by the history of national tennis.